Welcome back. The House Armed Services Committee has a new task force focused on reviewing the defense supply chain. The number of prime vendors is high by 36%. Travis Tritten is a senior reporter at Bloomberg Government, where he's writing about the defense industrial base along with his colleague Paul Murphy. Travis, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. Number of reasons that are going into why the number of prime contractors is declining over the last decade. What are the most severe ones that you and your colleagues found?
Right, yeah, we've seen kind of this stunning drop in the number of prime vendors, as you said, 36%. And there are a couple of different factors that we looked at that actually feed into each other. And the first one is mergers and acquisitions, especially among larger defense companies. You see a lot of companies joining together or buying up other companies. And that feeds into another issue, which is these smaller companies have a harder time to break into the business when you have these larger, more dominant companies there.
The numbers that you found were fascinating to me, Travis, because of all of the work that the Pentagon has done across administrations of both parties over the last decade or longer to try to bring companies into the defense industrial base who haven't traditionally done business. DIU, there are individual efforts within the services. OTAs, a lot of buzz around OTAs as a vehicle to do that. And yet the numbers that you demonstrate here indicate those efforts aren't working at least as well as the department would like. Is that a fair observation?
Absolutely. I think that's totally fair. And I think that this is an alarm bell for the Department of Defense. Some of these efforts may not be working as well as they had hoped, but we've seen all kinds of efforts to try to bring these companies in, especially mid-size and smaller technology companies. You saw Ellen Lord, the last acquisition chief at the Pentagon. She had programs like the Trusted Capital Marketplace, trying to match these venture capitalists with these smaller companies that were having these types of issues. But yet over the decade, we see that this trend is pretty clear, this consolidation of the industrial base, especially at the upper tiers.
During the Obama administration, there was a discussion at the top of the Department of Defense about whether and to what degree the department should at least give endorsement or if not approval to mergers and acquisitions. Any talk that you're hearing about reviving some kind of discussion like that?
I'm not hearing any talk at this time. That may be something that needs to be looked at again. We've seen a series of high-profile mergers and acquisitions. This year, we'll see Lockheed Martin plans to acquire Aerojet Rocketdyne, which makes rocket engines and missiles, so that it's going to be a competitor, with some of the other large defense companies. This may be just something that they have to address. I think that it's going to be very hard for them to do that, though.
The quote that you write about that I find the most disturbing is this: the supply chain is weak, and we have to take a hard look at that. That's not an observer. That's the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Hyten. That's pretty disturbing. The task force that I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation is going to take a look at that. What do you expect to see that task force examine, Travis?
Right, yeah, Hyten did not mince his words there. It was very stark. So the House Armed Services Committee has created this 8-member task force, and they're going to spend 3 months looking at the defense industrial base. Primarily, they're going to be looking at overseas supply chains that have been stressed out under the pandemic. But the hope is that they're going to start looking at some of these more domestic issues, the domestic defense industrial base, and the problems with these smaller companies being locked out. We're going to have to wait to see. Whatever they come up with could have a very good chance of being added into the House's version of the annual defense authorization bill. So if they do come up with something and they find that they have a solution, there's a good legislative chance of it getting through this year.
The pandemic is a separate issue, it strikes me, or maybe it's not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it strikes me the pandemic has created supply chain issues for the department. We've talked about those on this program. You've covered them in your coverage. But I guess now that I'm kind of thinking on the fly, Travis, are those challenges separate than what you're talking about consolidation? Or is maybe the health of an individual company potentially impacted by the pandemic what causes it to maybe go to market and decide it wants to be acquired by somebody else?
Right, yeah. Well, I believe that these are separate but connected issues. And obviously the pandemic is the most urgent, pressing issue at the moment. But these trends that we were looking at have occurred over the last decade. These are long-term trends that are much bigger than the pandemic itself. So I think that the pandemic needs to be dealt with, but these other systemic issues are going to probably need other solutions, and solutions that outlive the pandemic.
You get at something here at the very close of this piece that I think is also important, Travis, and that is the Trump administration took a lot of heat, and rightfully so, for the speed at which, or lack of speed, at which it put nominees into place for some of these important positions in the department. And you and Paul point out at the end of this piece, we still don't have a nominee for any of the top acquisition jobs inside the Department of Defense. What's the potential impact there as the department looks at the supply chain itself?
Right. Well, we do have Kathleen Hicks in as a Deputy Defense Secretary. So she's going to have some purview over these types of issues. But primarily, you want to see an acquisition chief in there, someone like, you know, an Ellen Lord, who can work directly with these issues, come up with their own solutions for the Biden administration to try to address this. And the administration so far just hasn't named these people, and there's starting to be some pressure around that. People wondering what is taking so long, and can we get some nominees out there? But so far, we just haven't seen that.
Travis, thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.